Doug.
Oh, hey.
Hi, thanks for coming for the interview. I heard you read your poetry a couple times, and I like it so much. And I kind of wanted to ask you, how do you write your poems, and where does your inspiration come from?
How do I write them? Well, when it comes to, primarily when it comes to crafting certain pieces, it really is on a case-by-case basis. Like, if I'm writing something that's more complicated, like something that's more topical or something that's more that I have to really think about and construct, that contains like facts or different themes, then I have to outline it. Like, I usually outline it, and I have a rule about performing first drafts. I never do that. I always will revise at least once, and then once I perform it and I get the requisite feedback that I need, I will go back and edit it based on the response that I get.
But you write a poem spontaneously, and then you look at it,
and I look at it.
Think about it first, like you have a subject.
Oh, it depends though. It really depends, because if I'm writing something that has a lot of commentary in it or something, or like that's more topical or particular, maybe it's a current event or a social issue or something like that, then I have to research it, and I have to make sure that there's a lot of pre-planning involved. So that's why I have to have a structural framework, like an outline. But if I'm writing something that's more emotional or introspective or meditative or something, then that's more organic, and I could just write it, and then I can go back and revise it later.
Right.
So it's really two processes.
Right.
You know
So
what I mean?
something is happening in the world, and you want to write about it. Then
Right.
That's the more structural one.
Yeah, that's the one.
But
exactly.
if you're on the ferry boat, okay, this is not a good example, but if you happen to be on the ferry boat and something happens that strikes you emotionally, then you have that poem inside you. You just start and write it, and
Exactly.
whatever it is, that's what it is.
Yeah, right. And then
Yeah,
and then I'll go back and revisit it later. But in the moment, it'll come out the way it's intended to. You know what I mean? In the visceral moment.
Okay. So how long does it take you to edit a poem, would you say?
Could be a few days, up to a week sometimes, maybe more. Depends. Like, there are poems I've spent like weeks on, and I sometimes I can't get them right, or I get frustrated. I'm like, I kind of hit a brick wall, and I'm like, let me, you know what I mean? I think that happens to a lot of us, where we kind of we're in like a rock and a hard place, and we have the poem written, but then it's like in the writing is in the rewriting. That's kind of what I believe. And so when I go back and revisit it, sometimes I could spend weeks on something, particularly if it's a more topical piece, and my vantage point might change, or say if I get certain responses at an open mic or at a feature performer or something, and I go back and revisit it and I make changes, then that takes me even longer.
Do people make suggestions?
Yeah, I mean, I'm open to critiques and stuff. Like, I like constructive criticism. I think opinions are, I mean, like, I do discard opinions, some of them, especially if there's no foundational, like, if the person who's giving me that opinion doesn't back anything up, like, it's just like a baseless sort of opinion, and it doesn't, like, there's no meat on what they're saying, like, you know what I mean? But then, yeah.
So do you have an opinion, say that it's a theme? I don't want to ask you if it's political or social or something, but you have an idea about the rightness or wrongness of it, or you just presenting your feelings about it?
Oh, you mean like in terms of like if something is topical or not, like a topical piece or a political piece? Yeah. No, it'll definitely contain my perspective on the issue. Like, I'm not gonna, like, I wouldn't, Yeah, I think I would have to. I don't really worry about offending anyone, but like I don't like my work doesn't contain like usually doesn't contain profanity or anything like that. I mean, if it's a topic, if it's a really sensitive topic, like say if it's like abortion rights or something, right?
Okay.
Or reproductive rights, right? I'm
Okay.
I'm a guy, right? I'm writing about reproductive rights.
Right.
So I would have to put myself in the perspective of women that I admire or that I know or that whatever I'm dating somebody and maybe we get into a conversation about it and then that might you know what I mean, like that'll kind of filter itself into the poem, like that's for an as an example, you know what I mean?
Right, that's a good example.
You know,
there's been a lot of political poems and a lot of people when they say their poem they're kind of venting a lot, so sometimes the poems don't appear revised or edited.
Right.
It's just kind of so, but I noticed that all your work is very clear and organized. You're not standing up there yelling.
Right.
Which personally, as a member of the audience, I appreciate.
Yeah.
But you also seem to perform your poems.
This is
Do
true.
you want to talk a little bit
Very
about
true.
that?
Sure. Yeah. My performance, I think, is rooted in kind of how I mean, I'm putting myself in the audience's shoes. Like, what would they want to get out of the experience? You know, because it is an experience. I don't view readings as, you know, stodgy, you know, academic, sort of stilted, uninvolved, you know, things. I view them as a real sonic and emotional experience. So like I have to convey that like at all times. You know what I mean?
Safe cracker, lock picker, insert mechanism into your cranium jack-in, Cat5 cables plugged in, fiber optic surge. For I limitlessly funnel information into your system, a master of chronology, one who upsets security, destabilizes matrices at no cost, impervious to injury, indomitable to a kill shot. My mind moves at radius times pi to the uppermost power. A stare-down contest renders you listless. Executing standardized testing with fearlessness, not shrieking in horror from unquenched aptitude, not shaking in my boots from circumventing bureaucracy that threatens to choke our institutions into submission. They call me a microphone fiend, feverishly plotting takeovers wherever there are platforms to mesmerize, causing sieges that rattle collective consciousness, shaking foundations, erecting towering monoliths, dispersing funds to communities in need, eviscerating red tape, for I require no tribute, working silently in the shadows. But when it's time to strike, making my reveal, people may squeal. Shock, awe is not what I seek, never meek. Words melodious to the mouth. Muscles matriculate, safe cracker, lock picker. I am not a fraudulent foe, just a hidden asset, holding court while counting my cards. Undetectable poker face. My actions resound, reverberating like the equipment I rock, utilizing cutting edge, cunning, imperceptible intelligence, linguistic mastery, effusive speech, not meant to cajole, but to incite congregation. There's power in masses, strength in numbers, summoning vestiges of might, seduce, code, attain understanding of advanced devices, become technologically supreme. Humans may not be gods, but attainment of skills mobilizes stragglers into subjugators, achieving oneness in a crowded ecosystem.
It's like a tenet for me. It's one of those like tenets that I kind of live by when it comes to performance. And I have a theater background. I got my BFA in technical theater, right?
Oh, that explains it.
So then so I got that in college, and then that sort of like that completely informs my performance ability or my sensibilities when it comes to performing. You know.
Well, I noticed during one performance that you didn't just get up and perform. I didn't know if you were like meditating a little bit before you began. I thought, and I could be wrong, I thought that you kind of squatted down and had a minute to yourself and then got up and performed.
Yes.
Is that correct?
That's true. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I thought that was very interesting because it is necessary to collect oneself. It's. Are you ever nervous?
Am I ever nervous?
Well, yeah.
I mean, not anymore. I used to be. Like when I was first starting out, because like I got started when I was around 15 or so, doing the cafe open mic circuit. My first experience was at the now defunct Muddy Cup in Stapleton on Van Duzer. So I was cutting my teeth there for a little while, and I think my initial mic experiences were sort of, they were, I think I possessed like native skill, but I think I was just rough around the edges. Mm-hmm. And I was in the company of people who were older than me. Mm-hmm. Like a lot of my mentors at the mic, people who were at the mic, they were in their 20s, and I was like still in my teens.
Oh, and that was considered older than you at that time.
That was at the time. They were in like their late 20s, some of them like early 30s, whatever. So that to me was like they had significant more experience, but like they didn't look at me as like this like punk kid. Like they sort of saw me as like, you know, that I had this potential, this untapped potential. But I will openly admit that my early mic experiences were rough, you know?
But that's kind of normal, isn't
Yeah.
it? I mean, you have to get started, and new beginnings are very hard.
Yeah.
You can't just, you don't emerge, fully grown. You have to grow up. So I think it's sort of the same way. You're on the poetry circuit now. But I want to go back a minute to, when did you first start writing poems?
Oh, writing them?
Yes, writing them.
Let's see, probably like 12 or 13 or so, something like that.
Oh,
Yeah.
And do you want to say what made you start writing poems at that age?
At that age? Yeah, I mean, both my parents had encouraged me a lot because they were both like professional writers. They both worked in news, and well, my mom was the editor of the Advance for a while, Staten Island Advance, and she did some work like at the Register and the Star and other places. And my dad was like a music journalist, like a music historian.
Oh, interesting.
And then so like they both had writing back, and he also wrote for in medicine. He was a medical writer. So like they both had professional writing experience, you know. So they encourage. I mean, they saw me sort of like reading a lot because they would expose me to a lot of like cultural, significant cultural material when I was young. Like I would, I grew up on like, foreign films like Iranian films and like French films, New Wave, and like all this other stuff. And
That's
like,
an interesting household.
you know what I mean?
To live in.
Yeah, and then like old time blues like Robert Johnson and Muddy Waters, and because that's my dad's background, so I was listening to old time blues records and like classic rock when I was like really young, and like so I think the seeds were being planted like from a really early age, and as soon as I started taking up poetry, like just writing, taking out like loose leaf, or if I came home from school after a full day of school, and like when I was done with my homework, I would like maybe do a piece or something,
Right. And
so yeah.
So they didn't really come from a deep emotional background full of pain. More came, well, I don't mean to say that. If you are very young and you're writing, everybody has some kind of pain.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
So those are the early poems, maybe, and now maybe it's a combination.
Yeah.
I should really say to people who are watching this, we are outside at Art on the Terrace.
Oh, right.
And so someone has their dog and
You got to say that.
It's barking, and you might hear birds. Beautiful day in Staten Island. So anyway, but to continue, you were writing from an early age. You developed your skill. You now can write easily on, for instance, something happens and you want to write. How long does it take you to actually get down the first part of the poem?
First part, probably like no more than like 20 minutes, maybe. You know, because it just it just sort of materializes now. You know what I mean?
It shows up.
Yeah, it just shows up.
You're kind of thinking, and there it is.
Yeah, I don't have to force it as I don't have to visibly force it. I don't have to like push it out.
You're not having angst over how am I going to whatever.
No.
You can just.
No, I'm not perseverating about it. I'm just like it just.
Okay.
You know, it just sort of.
And you're writing by hand or on your iPhone?
No, I'm writing. I usually write by hand. I'm still kind of analog, so I write by hand, and then I'll transcribe it after that. You know.
Okay, and that's a very different feeling, isn't it?
Yeah, it is.
It's slower.
Yeah. It is slower, and then it's more personal because I see my own handwriting, and then I can go back and revisit. You know, then I'll know when I wrote that piece based on how my handwriting is. You know
Okay.
what I mean?
Oh, that's very interesting.
You know?
And then, when you are editing, do you read your poem out loud to yourself?
Absolutely, all the time. Yeah.
Right. So you hear it.
I hear it.
Almost like you're in the audience. You hear your poem. You know. And do you record it also?
Yeah, I have a I have a field recorder. I use a field recorder, and I have a Tascam field recorder with a mic on it, and I just record
you can do
and
it like that. So it's a whole artistic process, but it's also technical, and you kind of breathing in the poem and letting it out. And
Precisely,
I think that there was a poet laureate, Robert Pinsky, I think is his name, and he did say that the poet writes the poem and he gives it out to the audience who breathes it back to him. So I was noticing when you were performing that I don't want to say I was inhaling your poem, but it felt very natural. And so, of course, we're going to have a reading by you so people can actually enjoy Doug Cala reading his work. But for today, I just want to thank you for coming.
yeah, of course. Absolutely.